Hello everyone, in this video we'll be discussing the 9 forbidden Bankai that have a devastating impact on their users and the surrounding area in the Bleach series. Without further ado, let's dive in and welcome to the Bleach universe! Today we're going to discuss the 9 most dangerous Bankai to use due to the damage they can inflict on allies, enemies, and the surrounding environment. So let's dive into the discussion. As we all know, Bankai is the third form of a Shinigami's Zanpakuto. By mastering Bankai, a Shinigami can gain a massive surge in power far beyond their usual level. That's why in every battle, Shinigami use Bankai as their ultimate weapon. However, aside from standard Bankai, there are some that, while offering benefits, also come with quite harmful side effects, or what we might call forbidden Bankai. And by forbidden here, we don't mean they're strictly prohibited, but rather that they have harmful effects that are quite dangerous for both the user and those around them. Although there are also Bankai that are actually banned by the Central 46. Well, for more details, here we've compiled a list of the 9 Bankai with the highest risks. Genryusai Yamamoto's Bankai, Zanka no Tachi. This old man's Bankai has one of the widest ranges compared to others. Not only does it affect the surrounding area, but the heat generated by Yamamoto's Bankai can even impact the entire Soul Society. As we know, this Bankai named Zanka no Tachi possesses 4 forms of power. The first is Zanka no Tachi East. This technique concentrates all of Ryujin Jaka's flames into the tip of his sword. Second is Zanka no Tachi West. This technique channels Ryujin Jaka's flames throughout Yamamoto's entire body, until his body temperature reaches 15 million degrees Celsius. Third is Zanka no Tachi South. This technique allows Yamamoto to summon an army of the undead. Finally, Zanka no Tachi North. This technique enables his sword to obliterate anything it strikes. With such immense power, it's no wonder that Yamamoto's Bankai is greatly feared by his opponents. However, behind this greatness, this Bankai has one serious drawback. If used for too long, it will destroy Soul Society itself. Therefore, Yamamoto had to end the battle as quickly as possible, so that the destruction of my Bankai wouldn't harm Soul Society, and that's why my Bankai is so dangerous. It hasn't even been used for 1,000 years. Shunsui Kyoraku with his Bankai, Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju. When this Bankai is unleashed, a dark yellow aura instantly engulfs the surrounding area. This Bankai works by bringing a fairy tale to life. In other words, it inflicts wounds on opponents according to the narrative of the fairy tale he tells. Kyoraku possesses 4 levels of ability within this Bankai, each with its own story and attack pattern. The reason this Bankai is considered dangerous is because it is indiscriminate in its application. Anyone in the vicinity, whether ally or enemy, is affected by its effects. Those struck by this deadly Bankai will instantly feel a dark aura that warps their perception, leaving them gloomy and filled with despair. Therefore, when using it, Kyoraku must ensure his allies are out of the Bankai's range. That's why he moved away when fighting Lila Baro at the Soul King's palace, and why he didn't use his Bankai against Coyote Stark during the Battle of Fake Karakura. One unique aspect of this Bankai is that Kyoraku can control the pace of the story he tells, whether he wants it to be fast or slow. Kuchiki Rukia and her Bankai Haka no Togum. Who would have thought that with her small, seemingly frail body, Kuchiki Rukia actually possesses a Bankai that turns out to be extremely dangerous? Her Bankai, named Haka no Togame, allows Rukia, when activated, to instantly create a cloud of fog that causes the surrounding temperature to drop drastically to absolute 0. Anything within the fog's area will instantly freeze and shatter within seconds. In addition to the fog, physical contact with Rukia's cold body can also cause someone to freeze instantly. Although it's extremely deadly to opponents, this Bankai ability is actually very dangerous for the user as well. How could it not be? In addition to lowering the temperature in the surrounding area, this Bankai also causes Rukia's body temperature to drop to an extremely low point. Therefore, Rukia must be extra careful when using this Bankai. If Rukia makes even a single mistake in lowering her body temperature, she could end up being killed by her own Bankai. Moreover, this Bankai cannot be used for too long, as doing so would eventually cause fatal damage to Rukia's body. Unlike her Shikai, where she can direct her freezing attacks anywhere, this Bankai has a wide range but is focused solely on a single point, Rukia herself. This makes it extremely dangerous if any allies are within its range. That's why Byakuya chooses to step back whenever Rukia is about to unleash her Bankai. Kenpachi Kuruyashiki with his Bankai, Gagaku Kairo. As told in the novel, Spirit Forever Are With You, Kenpachi Kuruyashiki possesses a Zanpakuto named Gagaku Kairo, whose power is considered a dangerous Bankai, so dangerous, in fact, that the Central 46 has banned its use within Seratai. According to rumors, Kuruyashiki's ability is to summon a massive jaw from the ground. This jaw is said to be so voracious and ferocious that it will tear apart anything within its reach, be it objects, buildings, allies, or enemies, except for Kuruyashiki himself. Although it doesn't have the same wide-ranging effect as Yamamoto's Bankai, which covers the entire Soul Society, Kuruyashiki's Bankai is capable of devouring objects within the boundaries of Seratai. That is why its Bankai is prohibited from being used within Soul Society. That is why he chose to exercise caution and refrain from using it, which is exactly what happened when he fought Azashiro, allowing Azashiro to defeat him easily. Interestingly, Kenpachi Kuruyashiki was once promoted to become a member of the Zero Division, and served at the Soul Society Palace. Shinji Hirako's Bankai, Sakashima Yokoshima Hapu Fusagari, has the ability to reverse the perceptions of both enemies and allies. In other words, by confusing people's minds, Hirako can cause those around him to fight each other. However, just like Kiraku's Bankai, Hirako's Bankai cannot distinguish between enemies and allies, so anyone within its range, whether enemy or ally, will be affected by it. So one can imagine that if Hirako were to carelessly unleash his Bankai, he could cause his allies around him to kill one another. Therefore, when using this Bankai, Hirako must ensure that only enemies are present around him. One fatal flaw of this Bankai is that it's useless in one-on-one combat. For example, he was easily defeated by Bambietta, who simply blew up the surrounding areas. Sajin Komamura with his Bankai, Kokujo Tengen Myu Dangai Jo. As we know, Sajin Komamura possesses a Bankai called Kokujo Tengen Myu, which, when activated, summons a giant knight standing 100 meters tall. This giant will mimic every movement Komamura makes, whether attacking or defending. In the initial form of his Bankai, Komamura actually suffered no side effects. But later, in an effort to increase his strength during the Second Quincy invasion, Komamura evolved into a human transformation form, which indirectly caused his Bankai to also evolve into a new form called Dangai Joe. In this mode, both Komamura and his Bankai become immortal. No matter how brutal the attack, it will have absolutely no effect. However, although this form is considered extremely superior, in order to reach the Dangai Jue mode, Komamura had to sacrifice his heart to his own ancestor. As a result, once the duration of his Bankai's use ended, Komamura had to accept losing his life as a Shinigami. At that moment, he reverted to his natural form, that of a wild beast, and it is in this form that he must spend the rest of his life for years to come. Next is Kenpachi Zaraki, whose Bankai name has not yet been revealed. Whether it is Nozarashi or another name with a similar meaning, it is known that when his Bankai is activated, Zaraki instantly transforms into a red creature with 2 horns on his forehead, wielding an axe-shaped sword. In this form, Zaraki possesses truly extraordinary strength and speed. He is like a demon with an incredibly powerful killing aura. Even a single swing is enough to split a giant like Gerard in 2. However, despite this immense power, Zaraki has not yet been able to control it properly, which causes him to lose consciousness. So much so that he might randomly attack those around him, even his own allies. Not only is this dangerous to others, but his own body can even be torn apart because he is unable to withstand the power of his Bankai. Seeing the power of Zaraki's Bankai and just how difficult it is to control, we can immediately understand why the Central 46 ultimately banned Zaraki from sword training. However, despite the negative effects of using his Bankai, so far we still can't be sure whether Zaraki has fully mastered it. Because if Zaraki were able to fully master it and control his consciousness, then this Bankai would no longer fall into the category of dangerous Bankai. Next up is Retsu Unohana's Bankai. Judging from her battle with Zaraki, this Bankai is capable of releasing a deadly acidic liquid. We can see that when this Bankai is activated, Unohana's sword blade is coated with a thick, blood-red liquid, which is actually a corrosive acid. Anyone who comes into contact with this liquid will instantly begin to melt at an extremely rapid rate. However, it turns out that while this acid is deadly to opponents, it also affects the user herself. We saw this when Unohana faced Zaraki. At that time, her own body began to melt after being exposed to her own acid. Fortunately, the negative effects of her Bankai can be countered by her highly effective healing Kaido. Therefore, whether this Bankai is dangerous or not depends on the user's proficiency in performing healing magic. However, if at any time Unohana runs out of energy or is unable to perform healing, this situation would certainly put her at high risk of being killed by her own Bankai. And last but not least, our favorite mad scientist, Mayuri Kurotsuchi with H-Head Bankai Konjiki Ashisoi Jizo. When this Bankai is activated, Mayuri instantly summons a giant caterpillar with the face of a baby, that can emit deadly poisonous smoke. This poison can spread within a 200-meter radius and will target anyone within that radius. So it's safe to say that using this Bankai is extremely dangerous for anyone near Mayuri. Even if they try to hold their breath, the poison will still enter their bodies and kill them. However, there are a few ways to survive this poison. First, by staying outside the designated radius. The second is to emit Reiyatsu around one's body so the poison doesn't come into contact with it. And the third is that if you've already been exposed to the poison, the only thing you can do is drink the antidote that Mayuri possesses. Well guys, that's all for this discussion on some of the dangerous Bankai we've just covered. Which one do you think is the riskiest and most deadly? Share your thoughts in the comments section. See you in the next discussion.